France's top military chief says his troops are prepared to attack the Syrian regime if chemical weapons are used in the Idlib province. Syrian President Bashar Al-Assad is gearing up to recapture this last major rebel-held stronghold.
The UN, U.S., and its allies fear that this battle would be a total bloodbath. There's about 3 million people living in the region. Half of those are civilians. And there's also thousands of terrorists embedded across the area. A regime onslaught could trigger a devastating humanitarian catastrophe and fuel a new refugee crisis. President Trump spoke about the looming battle yesterday in the Oval Office.
And I just tell you that they will hopefully be very, very judicious and careful, because the world is watching. That cannot be a slaughter. If it's a slaughter, the world is going to get very, very angry. And the United States is going to get very angry too. Okay? I am watching that very closely.
All right, for more on this now, we want to bring in former Navy SEAL Dave Sears. He's with us now from Washington via Skype. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave. First off, I want to ask you, just how significant is this battle for Idlib? Could this be a turning point when it comes to the Syrian civil war?
Without a doubt, it's a turning point. Whether it's a good one or not, I don't think it's the end to conflict in Syria. This has been a proxy war throughout the region that's been going on for 7 years, even precursors to that longer than that. So is it the end and the end of the civil war? Likely, yes. But it's going to take months and months. Remember Aleppo and Guetta, they took months and months to do, and this is much bigger.
So, Dave, leaders, as you know, from Russia, Iran, and Turkey are expected to hold a summit in Tehran tomorrow. Explain to our viewers why these three countries are so invested in Idlib, and can they actually broker some type of deal to avoid the absolute carnage that's expected in the region if this happens, if Assad tries to take the city?
They're invested. So Russia and Iran are essentially the air. Russia is the air arm, and Iran is the ground arm of the Syrian army conducting this civil war. Now, the Syrian army is involved as well. Russia and Iran are invested in Syria staying status quo and maintaining its territory, and Assad staying in place, at least for the time being. Turkey is invested in the north of Syria. So Turkey's actually occupying territory there. They have concerns over, they have more refugees that have come to them than any other country. I think they have estimates of somewhere around 3 million or so, may even be upwards of that. Turkey is fearing another humanitarian crisis and more refugees coming across the border. It's also an economic piece for them. There was estimates in one of the Russian gazettes the other day that Turkey has somewhere about $1.4 billion of trade and economic benefits from Idlib itself. So there's a huge investment in this area.
So is it concerning, though, that the U.S. is not involved in any of these talks? The only interest the U.S. would have is in stability for the country and stability for the region.
I think we get to an era where why should the U.S. be involved in every single conflict or regional piece that goes on? So these are people that are in the region, Turkey, Iran, Syria, Russia, that all are proximate borders to this area. And they have a vested interest to it. If we start putting our 2 cents in as well, I'm not sure that that's helpful.
Well, the president has expressed, though, concerns, as you know, Dave, about Idlib. He tweeted about how any assault there would be what he called a grave humanitarian mistake. So what should the United States position be in Syria? We know the president has in the past used missile attacks when it was ascertained that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his people. What should the focus of U.S. strategy be in that country?
I think that's a piece. So we go towards one, the counterterrorism strategy or anti-terrorism. So we don't want ISIS to be able to come back, spread, and have a safe haven in order to conduct operations external to Syria and be able to hit us or our other interests in the region. On the other side, you have to have this piece of chemical weapons that is enforced that says we are not tolerating anybody in the world using chemical weapons, and there will be a severe price to pay, both militarily and economically a price to pay. So we have to be cautious, though, going into this. This chemical weapons piece, if you go back, and it got glossed over a little bit, the April attacks in Douma were, the OPCW, the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons, said that there were no nerve agent evidence used. They had some evidence of chlorine. They couldn't find evidence that Syria had done it. So both sides, the rebels and the Syrians/Russians, are setting up for what's called a false flag operation. They both want to claim that the others are using it. And that's a big concern. So what do we do in that case? How do we prove that it was truly the Syrian state that used it and not the rebels or the terrorists? We don't have a choice but to respond, but we have to be very, very measured in our response, and it's got to be in line with global response and sentiment as well.
All right, so speaking of that, the United Nations Security Council will be holding a meeting tomorrow. What can member countries do to address the situation in Idlib?
Well, members of the Security Council, I don't think that they can do much. They don't have actually any power to compel. They don't have the forces that can help this. They could propose some sort of a, peacekeeping force that maybe went in there to rout them out, but the security situation there isn't enough for that. So I'm not sure they can do anything other than some rhetoric and condemnation of it.
Yeah, it's such a critical, what's happening in that country is so important for this country and for many people who are watching this looming humanitarian crisis. And I'm glad, Dave Sears, you were able to talk us through it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Juan.